Well, why is plant biotechnology important? Because it can help the world deal with many of its biggest, very complex challenges. Challenges such as world hunger, human health, sustainability and environmental degradation, climate change, water quality and shortages, the need for sustainable sources of energy, rural poverty, and the empowerment of women.
Right now, we're dealing with a growing population. By 2050, we'll have 9 billion people on this earth. How are we going to make sure that our agriculture actually is viable, sustainable, and productive? Those are the key issues at stake right now.
Scientists out of MIT, Harvard, Yale, and Cornell, so very reputable institutions, they did a review of existing research and they looked at yield increases. There were no increased yield benefits from GE crops that exist that we have now in our system.
We have side-by-side corn and soy trials over a 27-year period where we see 33 to 50% reduction in fossil fuel use. We see greater soil organic matter. We see greater nitrogen fixation in those mature soils. We also see yields comparative over the 27-year cycle. And in drought years, we can see increases between 38 and 75% in the organic system because that organic soil matter holds the moisture.
A study was done, for example, out of Michigan University and Sussex University in the UK, and they found that using existing cropping methods that are sustainable and some conventional methods, it would be possible to feed everybody now. It already is, but it would be possible to feed the growing population using the land base that we have at the moment that we use for food. And it would also, if we use more sustainable practices, allow us to fixate nitrogen, and that would mitigate the use of fossil fuels moving forward.
On feeding the world, I think it's utter nonsense. I do work in some developing countries. I think it's utter nonsense to say we're going to feed the world because of GMOs. That's utter nonsense.
The crops that have been developed so far have not been pitched towards feeding the people of the world. They've been pitched in other directions.
Now, what we're also not hearing about is the non-GM research. There's a lot of real sexy research out there that's not genetic modification. We've seen drought-resistant wheat varieties. We've seen drought-resistant African crops being developed through conventional development, and we'd love to see a lot more energy put in that direction.
When golden rice was produced, and there are arguments about the vitamin A content of that golden rice.
We know from studies that have been done by nutritionists to get the amount of vitamin A that you would need.
Direction of attempting to deal with a very significant problem in which 500,000 young people a year in developing countries
If we would allow farmers to have the blindness problems that they now have under the system that we've created for them through this industrial agricultural system.
As a result of using GM, the use of pesticides on cotton in Australia fell by about 2/3. Likewise, the use of pesticides on canola in Canada has fallen by a similar amount as a result of the adoption of GM.
It's disingenuous to then have that stand as a number. Overall, we've seen an increase in use of agrochemicals with the introduction of GE crops, and I used the number earlier from the USDA's own numbers, 13 years of commercialization, 385 million additional pounds of pesticides being used in that period. So while we are seeing a reduction in the insecticides, there's an increase in the herbicides, and we're also now seeing stacked traits. So whereas you used to see just BT corn, now upwards of 60% of the corn planted in the States has both Roundup Ready and the BT traits. So while there may be less insecticide for the BT trait, there's also increased Roundup.
There is some precision that seems to be there in the GE technology, but it is still based on chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, and chemical herbicides. And as the price of oil is hitting $4 a gallon in California, and we're seeing these resources dry up, it seems irresponsible to pin all of our hopes on a style of agriculture that's dependent on cheap fossil fuels.
We're now relying on 15 crops and 7 animals. We have a very, very constrained agricultural system. And I think that that's not to our system that is more resilient, that reflects biodiversity in a bigger way than the direction we would be going in by adopting more GMO crops.
The United Nations Environmental Program has just recently done a green sort of a green economy futures report, and it had a section on green agriculture. And again, they identify that down the road we do need to look at peak oil, we need to look at climate change, and so we need to look at agroecological systems as providing some answers to those issues that we're facing, and not looking at GE as a silver bullet.
The other point that's worth making here in terms of the cost of GMOs with respect to adopting genetically modified organisms by farmers is an idea that was put forward by a researchers at the University of Saskatchewan, Furtan and Gray. And what they said is there is no first adopter advantage to taking on genetically engineered crops. Rather, GE creates a market for lemons in which the market perceives GE to be an inferior crop. And they estimated that for U.S. producers, that there would be a penalty paid of up to 41 to 57% for lower prices.
GMOs are forbidden in all organic agricultural systems. You're not allowed to use it whether you're a grower or a processor. So yeasts, all the way down to seeds, is not permitted. And this is a response to consumer demand. We have reams of studies going back, and they're all in the range of about 80% of people want to see this product labeled, and if it were labeled, between 70 and 80% of people would probably choose not to eat it if they knew that's what was going on.
I am one that believes that current policies don't serve consumers well right now. 91% of Canadians, Jody, you mentioned it, Alison as well, you mentioned that the majority, vast majority of Canadians actually are in favor of mandatory labeling, and the evidence is there. Most surveys actually do provide evidence that Canadians actually want labeling for all sorts of reasons.
While we still have one of the most robust regulatory systems in the world, it's a long way from infallible. And for folks from the 60s and 70s remembering the thalidomide disaster, we know where we have approved things in the past and then learned in the future that it wasn't the golden goose we thought it was, and we've been able to pull that back from the environment. With GEs, once it's out there, we don't have the ability to pull it back if we learn in the future that we were wrong.
The one that I'd like to bring particularly to your attention is the case of triffid flax. Our Canadian farmers, and these are conventional farmers and organic farmers, our Canadian farmers had their $320 million market into the EU threatened in 2009 because genetically engineered triffid flaxseed was detected. And what's interesting about this case is that supposedly that seed was destroyed by the universities of Saskatchewan, where it had been developed almost a decade ago, and yet in 2009 it appeared within our food system, and as a result of that contamination, our crop was turned away from the EU.
Folks who are growing GMO product be responsible to verify how they're managing that and allow the other folks the ability to just be GMO free without having to prove it.
Why should the burden be on people farmers who don't want to have genetically engineered content in their fields and people who don't want to eat genetically engineered food?
Most of you know that Australia was challenged by a huge drought over a decade, and a Canadian-based company developed a drought-resistant canola. To grow canola, you need a lot of water. When you're experiencing a drought, you don't have any water, and a Canadian company was able to actually provide this technology to Australia and grow fields of canola despite the drought.
Well, we have some interesting data, and I'll just go into one particular study, and if people want more information, again, please see me and I'll happily provide some. But we have side-by-side corn and soy trials over a 27-year period.
The reason over 27 years is because this is probably one of the baseline studies in the world where in the past we argue, well, we can't compare this study to that study because we don't have controls. So this is a truly controlled study. And what we've seen is that as you begin to manage organically over time, you see those benefits accrue. And so in the first 10 years of that system, you wouldn't see nearly the level of benefit that you do in the next 17 years of the system because we don't even begin to understand what's going on with soil microbiology. This is a new science for us in the last 20, 30 years. So we think there are things potentially going on in the soil we don't begin to understand, that when that soil is managed for its organic content over time, the level of biodiversity there is providing some protections back to the crop.
In drought years, we can see increases between 38 and 75% in the organic system because that organic soil matter holds the moisture.
As I said, it doesn't matter whether you're an Indian farmer, and there's been massive uptake of the technology there, an African farmer, or a Canadian farmer. You know, the seed is scale neutral. You can use it whether you're big or small. And so I think from a social justice standpoint, I think that is one of the great attributes of this technology.
2 billion people have to produce food. They're subsistence farmers. Their problem is a production problem. Okay? They cannot, they're subsistence farmers because they cannot produce enough food.
Just tell me how you would support, or GMO would support, a poor peasant farmer in Malawi who does not have money to buy the seed.
Once again, as I said earlier, it's about choice for those farmers. I mean, they can continue to have access to the seeds that they've always had, as good or as bad as they perform, or making available these modern seeds. And once again, that individual will have that choice.
In terms of patented seeds helping small lot farmers in the developing world, it's a ludicrous argument, and I agree with Manish. We do a disservice when we idealize subsistence farming and those 2 billion people who are existing at that level. But we also do a disservice when we completely dismiss subsistence farming when it's supported in a way where women have power in their communities, where there's access to clean water. Subsistence farming can be a really great way to organize a community around values other than money.